Well,
Okay, Ellen.
our Terry is going to introduce Robert tonight.
Okay, Terry, are you ready?
Okay.
Ready?
Just
The
Terry,
program
I just
started?
might jump in real quick beforehand. The way Robert's going to be doing the presentation, and everybody will be on mute, of course, except him. But please do, during the presentation, feel free to ask a question via the chat bubble, which is usually, depending on what your screen looks like, it's usually down on the very bottom center. And we'll get those questions to him right away. He appreciates how holding the questions to the end, you might not remember, everything. So he's open to taking questions during the presentation, but just again, if you put them in the chat, we'll go ahead and make sure those get read to him, while the presentation's going on. And with that, over to Terry.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
You're good,
okay.
Terry. Go ahead.
We'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Robert Liu tonight. It's wonderful that he's able to join us. A little bit about him. Robert was born in Rome and immigrated to the US from China after World War II with his mom and 4 siblings. He trained as an ethologist and ichthyologist, and he received his PhD from UCLA, where he worked on
Terry, you muted.
I just unmuted myself. Thank you. He worked on experimental gerontology and immunology in the Department of Pathology in the School of Medicine until 1975. Founder of the magazine The Bead Journal in 1974, Dr. Liu and his wife, Carolyn Benesh, were publishers and co-editors of its successor, Ornament Magazine, since 1978. Self-trained as a jeweler and photographer, he has written extensively on ancient, ethnic, and contemporary personal adornment, as well as gerontology, ichthyology, animal behavior, military technology, and construction equipment. Liu started collecting and researching beads in 1972, in addition to designing jewelry that incorporated beads and artifacts. In 1995, Dr. Liu wrote and published what is considered to be the most thorough resource on beads called Collectible Beads, A Universal Aesthetic. We'd like to give a warm welcome to you, Dr. Liu.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I wanted to warn you that one of my molars is growing sideways and it's rubbing against the side of my mouth. And I feel like I had one too many. So if you don't understand me, please tell me that. I seem to slur when it rubs too much against my mouth. Were you able to understand me just then?
Yeah, we're great.
Okay, all right. Anyway, while I'm really talking about trade, the whole focus behind it is talking about human skills, ingenuity, and the spread of ideas through both material goods and techniques. It took me a long time to realize what I'm really interested in is how humans did things, both today, 300,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. And those of you who are in this society are all makers. So you all know what it takes to develop an idea into something concrete. And this is essentially what I'm talking about. If you look at the first page, you will see that to the left, from 19,000 BCE, these shells and perforated teeth come from famous caves in France, where they first saw how Paleolithic people ornamented themselves. And these come from Beloit College in Wisconsin. They're about the only collection like this in North America, and I was lucky enough to go and study them and photograph them. Now, to the right of the screen, you'll see some Jatine beads that come from Indonesia. The one to the extreme left is from the 5th or 6th century. The one in the middle is a replica from 1995, and the one on the right is 5 years later. And this, what does this show you? This shows you that in 5 short years, these glass makers from Java learned to make glass so well that today I can no longer tell a replica from the real thing. So just think, in 5 years, people who work under very primitive conditions learn how to improve their technique so vastly and so quickly. And this is something that really intrigues me, is how people develop their skills. Now, I always give this preaching. We study ancient ornaments to understand our past and ourselves. And what you see is a Warring States horn-eyed bead, which is about the most complex and precise bead that has ever been made in China and was never made after that period. When all the little cities, then the second shows some ethnographic jewelry, and these are Jing Chinese rattan and silver bracelets. My grandmother used to wear these. Now, it's just as important to study contemporary craftspeople to understand crafting techniques and what will be soon our history. And this is a silver brooch from Joe Wood in American Jewelry. Now, trade means something to many, many different people. Today, we don't go shopping much directly. Some people trade just by clicking on Amazon or eBay. If you go to the grocery store, you may not realize that the reason we have such abundant, cheap, and good food is most of it comes from abroad. It may come from Chile, Peru, Mexico. And how does it come? Well, one of the main things is it comes by containers. On the left is a Maersk Danish container ship. This is a relatively little one. Maybe it holds 10,000 containers. But if you realize every container is the size of a tractor trailer, you pull into a port, you try to unload 10,000 containers. Think about what it takes just to unload this, how customs can inspect them, usually with huge X-ray machines, and then thousands of trailer trucks have to take them to their final destination. Well, there are thousands of these ships crossing the oceans at any one time. And due to storms and modern technology, thousands are lost overboard. So this is not exactly the best way, but this is what is done nowadays. In antiquity, on the right, like in the pre-Columbian Americas, trade was usually carried on the backs of humans by these Aztec traders. There are no animals of burden. In South America, you may have camelids like vacuna, but oftentimes, like through the Southwest, people carried whatever they traded on their backs. Well, 100,000, maybe 200,000 years ago, beads set off modern human behavior because we use these to adorn ourselves, and through that, we learn to improve our hand skills. And I was taken by the fact that some archaeologists believe that the realistic cave art may be linked to autism or having traits linked to detail focus. And detail focus is obviously something all of us know, because when you're grinding a stone, really, really close and you're looking at everything. So sometimes this suggests that artists and craftspeople are autistic. It may be not real, but the fact is those of us who make things are very, very focused on detail. Now on the right, there are some grooved elk teeth from Russia about 8,000 years ago. And grooving is one way of stringing something. If you can't perforate it, like something like these hard elk teeth, you cut a groove around it and you wrap a string. And this may be learned from Neanderthals, whom we have interbred. As you know, many of us carry Neanderthal genes in us, some more than others. And their cave art is about the earliest 64,000 years ago. So what was precious in the ancient world? Rare, scarce materials from far away, like lapis here, turquoise, which is not represented, quartz, agates, banded agates, etched carnelian, all the materials that took very much skill and labor to work into finished products. And this is not something that most people think of, but skill and labor transform ordinary things into extraordinary things. So preciousness was closely related to status. It was controlled by elites, and much of the working of prestige goods like these beads was in palaces or temples under tight elite supervision in ancient societies. All kinds of food. All of us are familiar with lapis. It only occurs in Afghanistan, in Badakhshan, and it was highly prized then and highly prized now. So if you look at this map, Afghanistan is here. All these trade routes point to westward, and often their customers were thousands of miles away. For instance, Sumer or Mesopotamia was 12,000 miles from Afghan lapis mines. So one of the things the ancient miners did, as you can see over here, was to reduce the waste of lapis so that they would cut it into small nodules or even into beads. And by this, they would reduce maybe 80% of the material, but thereby make it much lighter to carry this vast distance, probably with maybe camels or donkeys or something, or on their backs. So this is the concept of increased value by working your material on site. The earliest possible trade may have been 300,000 years ago in Kenya, where people traded stone tools or ochre, which is a pigment important for drawing on cave walls and for ornaments. So things like lapis, copper, carnelian, these were all traded. If you look, here's the Indus Valley. All these reds indicate trade routes, some by land, some by sea. So this is pretty remarkable when it's taking place that long ago, much of it 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. So if we remain on this University of Pennsylvania Museum map, you can see gold, silver, carnelian, lapis, copper, alabaster, steatite or soapstone, bitumen or tar, and shells were all very important trade items. In the upper right-hand corner, you see these beautiful carnelian cone beads. Only one is real from about 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. The rest are replicas made by Mark Knoyer under his direction to try to reduce the trade in antiquities. In the middle of the right hand, you see a copper oxide ingot. And this was to simulate an oxide hide. But this is how they made a standard unit of a precious material like copper to ship it. And at the very bottom are glass ingots from a shipwreck off of Turkey that came from about 1400 BC. So of interest to us is that from the Indus Valley, people exported precious personal adornment like beads all the way into much more developed societies like Mesopotamia. And on the left, you see this beautiful necklace of banded agates, gold. I forgot what the green beads are. They kind of look like Apache tears, but I don't think they are. But in the midst of all this, there's one beautiful long bicone bead. And this was from a warrior's grave, 2250 BC. And this particular bead, we know, since they're only made in the Indus Valley, came all that distance to this grave. And as you know, Mesopotamia and that region was highly developed. On the right-hand bottom, we have a reconstructed bead cloak from Queen Huabi. She caused quite a stir because when her burial pit was opened, there were many, many of her followers that were sacrificed, and it was terrifically rich. As you can see, her bead cloak is made out of lapis and carnelian, both long-distance imports, besides almost 20 pounds of gold on her headdress. So you can see these people were extremely rich. Now, many of these long beads came from the Indus Valley or the Harappan cultures. And here you see a belt of copper alloy and long carnelian beads, as well as other kinds of jewelry from that time. Now, this is one of two of such belts known. And it probably took 2 to 3 years to make, because just to drill one of these beads took 3 to 8 days. And it was very difficult to find carnelian nodules that were long enough to make such beads. So how do you make and how do you drill these kinds of stone beads? And as all of you know, carnelian is pretty high on the Mohs scale. I've tried drilling that with diamond and other bits and hardly made a dent, yet they do not have such hard materials. So if we look at in the upper corner, they would look at a raw nodule, they would chip a window just like you would. If it was good material, you keep it to sell. If it was bad, you threw it away. Then the selected nodule went to the merchant, and then the merchant took it to the workshop. And what they would do is first dry it in the sun. Then they would put it into a closed ceramic vessel and heat it. And then after that, they would chip it, split the nodule, do a rough out, heat it again, and the second chipping would give you a rough out. Then you would grind it, polish, drill, and then heat it again to get your final bead. And in this insert, you can see that they are polishing some beads on grooved sandstone. And this is, they had none of the tools we have today, so sandstone played an important part. Now, why did they go through these procedures? If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see that if you take a chip of carnelian unheated, it's barely got any color. After you heat it once, some of it turns very orange, some of it turns yellow. If you heat it repeatedly, it gets a beautiful color of the carnelian. So early on, someone noticed that heat changed the color. And as those of you that are much more learned about mineralogy than I am, know it's affecting the iron oxides, which turn it red. So not only do you increase the color to a desirable type, but you also may make it more friable, so it's easier to chip into the beads and to grind. And in this insert on the right, you'll see two actual ancient carnelian beads with earnestite. These are what they drilled these holes with. And that was about 2500 BC, over 4,500 years ago. And I'm not sure that if you had the same equipment today and an electric drill, you could get as good results. Now, the wonderful thing is these techniques are not very much different than what was done in India today, or very close to today, before many people switched to electric tools. Here you see a man kneeling from combat in India, and he's using indirect percussion to flake the rough carnelian that has been heated. And what he does is he places the nodule on an iron stake and hits it and indirectly flakes off to make his roughouts. On the right, you see 4 roughouts, and these came from 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, in the same place, in this valley. This technique really didn't change very much. On the lower right, you see one rough out, one replica, and one real bead. And the ancient vine cone, which is perhaps about this long, has a very large perforation because the earnestite drills did make a big hole. The replica is drilled with a diamond bit. And what they do is take a little chip of rough diamond, put it into a needle, and use that as a drill. And on the left-hand side, lower left-hand side, you see from the Pitt Rivers Museum, an agate nodule, a series of rough outs, and a series of faceted long icons that were made for the head hunting Nagas of India. So you can see that this is a very conservative kind of industry, and it did not change very much. And I think, except for the use of electricity and diamond tools, you still work stones and minerals like ancient peoples did. Now, we have today a lot of tools. I won't go into it too much, except for the fact that now, by using a laser to ablate it so that you can measure the composition, you're now able to tell stones that are very similar to each other, but come from very different sources. For instance, here in the upper right-hand corner, left-hand corner, you can tell South Indian carnelian from Iranian and from Western India. So if you are a scientist with a good lab and good equipment, you can now take a stone that looks essentially the same And by doing these compositional analysis, you can tell whether it comes from India, Egypt, or Iran. If we look at what we know today, on this map, between 400 BC and 200 AD, people have plotted the routes. The red are from historical Chinese documents of trade in Southeast Asia and through the islands. The blue is from Asian and European networks. And you can see how people essentially followed the shoreline because that was the safest way to travel. They would go up around India, go up the Persian Gulf, or else they would go through the Red Sea, and then some would go to Africa, East Africa. So trade was both land and sea. So what is, of course, not shown by a map like this is that sailing vessels were not developed like what we have today. They were at the mercy of the winds. So monsoon winds changed seasonally. You could only go one way in the summer and the other way in the winter. So, plus the fact is, all these wooden boats are much more susceptible to oceanic conditions. So these people took terrific chances to explore new lands and find new places of trade. If we just look at Cambay agate beads, and we just showed you how they were made, and Cambat or Cambay is in India at the mouth of the rivers, you can see that between the 10th and the 14th century, they had extensive trade through island Southeast Asia, all the way up to Canton in China. They went up the Persian Gulf into the rich Mesopotamian area, or else they came up the Red Sea and then on to Egypt, or else they hit spots along East Africa. So trade was really extensive, and I think even to me, surprising the extent of it. Okay, what kinds of things other than beads? Well, there are these fascinating Ling Ling O earrings that are made in jade or in glass from Vietnam. And this is not that old. It's about 1000 BC to the 2nd century. But we know now that the jade that they use came from Taiwan. And Vietnam is quite a ways from Taiwan. So if you look up here, is Taiwan, and Vietnam is somewhere here. Sorry. But what is fascinating is that they probably sent this material from Taiwan to the Iron Age Vietnamese jade workers in blanks. So here we have the one in nephrite and the one in glass, which is much easier to work. This glass is considerably softer on the mold scale. So if we look at these 3 jade ones in picture A, and then in picture B, there's another more elaborate type that's called the bicephalus earrings. And these probably were based on some type of rare and maybe extinct antelope. So the 3rd picture over here, called E and F, shows a slab of jade from Taiwan. How did they work this? They most likely cut the craftspeople received this by seed trade. Then they took a core drill, cut out a big core, leaving some remnants which were not wasted. In the bottom picture here, you see part of this core drilled piece, and out of that, they would drill 4 more pieces, and out of that, they could make 4 earrings. So this is pretty remarkable. That has only been discovered a few years ago by Taiwanese archaeologists. This ancient trade in raw material of jade. And also what's interesting to me is that the same craftspeople that worked in jade could see that they could work it in glass, which is much less difficult, and you could make much more fancy ones because glass was so easy to cut. So this is how someone takes an idea and develops it, moves it to another medium. Now, what's the relationship in time of glass to other silicates? Those of you may know what glaze stones are. They were the earliest colored stones. They would take a stone like an agate or some other hard stone, coat it with oxides and heat it, and essentially melt this colored coating onto the bead. Then etched carnelians came along much later. Faience, which we'll talk about, was one of the most important material to humans because this was a man-made material that you could use for mass production. Egyptian blue is somewhat similar, but glass is actually a way late comer. It came about 2500 BC. Faience is about 6,500 years old. But glass is 2,000 years younger. But both materials really changed how people made things. And in the bottom, you see a selection of faience objects from around the world. This was utilized by many, many societies because it was so valuable in the sense that you could make so many things from it. How do you make faience? Well, it takes a lot of materials to make this compound. You take desert plants because you need the ingredients from them, salt and different things. Or you took natron, which is a salt-like mineral. You took lime, you took quartz, you took sand, copper, and copper ore to color it. And all of this you have to grind. Then you had this mixture of faience. You poured water. If you poured a lot of water, it became a slurry. If you poured less, it became a paste. And both of these were workable. You could put the paste into a mold and make your product like this frog amulet, or you could use the slurry to color it, like the eyes. And after it dried a bit, you turned it over to cut the seal on the reverse side. But what is interesting about faience is the self-glazing, which means after you mixed in everything, the glaze was not on the outside. The glaze wicked out in a phenomenon called efflorescence, which means that in a very dry environment, as it dried, these things will migrate to the outside. And after that, you could fire and you would get out of this gray mush, you would get beautiful colors like this green and red, or usually blue. Or there's others ways of working it, but this is more or less the traditional way of going from all these dry ingredients to the final product. So self-glazing is this unique property of faience. Now, all of you know about ancient Egypt. They were the jewelers par excellence, terrifically precise in their stoneworking, metalworking. But one of the things that they're best known for is fans, like mummy beads, okay? And the hundreds of thousands of beautifully made amulets. And how did that work? They took this lump of paste and squeezed it into a fired mold. And it takes the original preceding, either let it sun dry or fire it. And here you would get repeated, precise, beautifully colored amulets. These are from the 18th dynasty, the time of Tutankhamun. They're fruit, and they use these to make broad collars. These are the amulets, and Egyptians had hundreds of different types of amulets. As it turns out, here is an actual mold with a lump of dried fans in it before they fired it. Now, these amulets are all of Tuat or the hippo amulet. And why was this amulet important? Goddess of childbirth. And all of you know how perilous giving birth was. So obviously we wanted to have as many of these amulets as possible. Now, you saw these little glass ingots, which are, the size of a big cupcake. These were extremely precious because this is how glass was traded and transported. But more important than this was that fact is, how do you put color into glass? You have to have different oxides of cobalt, copper, iron that were melted into the glass, then put into clear glass to color them. But nobody actually knew how did you take this lump of glass and use it in finished products. So in 1996, Dudley Giberson, a very gifted glass worker, did an experiment. He made little ingots of his own, crushed them, then he wetted them so that they were sort of like the way you would bread a chicken maybe. He took a core, a sand core, folded it out this frit, and thereby could use maybe 99% of it with no waste, because otherwise you would waste this precious material. And he made these beautiful beads using that technique. So here is where we have science and art intersect, and another example of terrific human ingenuity. Glass was a terrifically important item of trade. For instance, this press molded goddess, you can see that it has cobalt oxide. So somebody had to trade these ingots to these people for them to make these precious amulets. In Islam, between 700 and 1400 CE, they had a vast trade in glass beads. Now, first, we have to know, what are Islamic beads? Well, in the early 2000s, Sage and Tom Holland, two terrific glass artists from Arkansas, replicated these very characteristic folded Islamic beads, so that now we know how you make them, how you identify them. For instance, with this little glass pendant, Tom and Sage made a disc of very colored glass, heated it, folded it, then pull the two ends around, and you can see that this is exactly the, oops, sorry, exactly the same thing as here. So in order for us to identify things, it helps a lot to know how they were made. So if you think that the Chinese today have a monopoly on trade, well, the Islamic states did pretty well in the 7th to 14th century. All that's green are areas of the world that Islamic beads have been found in. The two places that are shaded different are India and China, and they may not have, for some reason, traded there, but they certainly are in Xinjiang province over here. And what types of, oops, sorry. What types of beads? Well, they had millefiori beads, they had segmented beads, and other beads like these folded beads or these morpheus that are instantly identifiable. So for people who are studying distribution, you have to be able to identify the bead and then know where it came from and plot out its distribution. And these two beads, one in beautiful shape, one terrible. A friend of mine actually found a terrible bead on the Old Salt Road in Morocco when he was there hunting meteorites. So that was, and Morocco is here, and there was terrific trade up and down Africa. Gold going one way, slaves going one way, beads and salt going the other way. Now, one of the very rare things that I have studied for years, and I'm writing a large paper on, are mosaic face beads made of glass. And you might not know what they are, but they bear images of faces. Either one type of face that represents a monster, or Medusa, a beautiful woman with long hair and necklaces. Now, these rank among the most rare things in the world. The early face beads, which are about from 100 BC to 100 AD, there may be thousands of them distributed around the world. But the later ones, there are less than 25 of them. So whenever things are rare and complex, it gets your scientific goat. And so I've studied these for 30, 40 years, and I'm just beginning to know a little bit more. But you have to realize everything I study is just with my eyes or a microscope or photographs. I don't have the tools to analyze them compositionally like scientists in museums or institutions. But just to show you about rare things, in the right-hand corner here is a prehistoric Southwest bird form overlay pendant. And there have been fewer than 10 of these found in the American Southwest. So our native peoples have done some remarkable work themselves. So if we look, here's a distribution of early Roman face beads in red. This doesn't mean that it's everywhere, but these are the countries where they have been found. And if those of you that don't know about them, they're only about the size of maybe 2 to 2.5 centimeters. And so for people to make faces 2,000 years ago was a remarkable trait and probably a real secret. And what they did was to make a larger face in a king, heat it up and draw it out until the bead on the faces are only a few millimeters. So these were very precious. They were to ward off evil, and there were only a few types, but unfortunately, on the shelf for them. So a lot of what we know is based on suppositions. Now, as I mentioned, Chinese are doing pretty good trade these days. Well, in antiquity, they weren't bad either. Between 1200 and 1900, Chinese glass beads were distributed widely throughout the world, including North America. These were coil beads or leadless glass beads. And for instance, the bead that's on this side came from an Indonesian shipwreck. The beads on this side came from around the Columbia River. So you can see people really valued beads. They were widely traded, made many, many nations extremely rich. Now, some of you may know the phenomenon of kefir beads, and these are remarkable beads made only by Mauritanian women in the 19th century. Now there are copies and fakes that are really poor. But what is unique is that on a core of glass, they would crush colored Islamic or European beads into a powder and then moisten it with saliva and with the tip of a needle make these intricate patterns. It was I mean, every time I look at them, I almost cry at the skill of these women, how they could make these intricate patterns, and then they would simply bake it in a sardine can to get these beautiful beads. This is virtually unknown anywhere else in the world, except in South Dakota. Native Americans also made very, very simple powdered glass pendants, sometimes with their images. As you can see, these are very, very simple and not sophisticated like that. And this is probably a coincidence and not a transfer of techniques, because there's no way in Northwest Africa and North America could be in contact at that time. One of the remarkable things about pre-Columbian jewelry is that they also were people who use long distance travel to obtain the materials. And we have prehistoric Southwest, we have Mississippi and Hopewell, and then in Mesoamerica, the Olmecs, Aztecs, and then there are these huge Andean civilizations. They all make remarkable things in the trade obtained from long distance trade. Here, for instance, if you look at Hopewell people who are in Ohio and the Midwest, they got obsidian and grizzly teeth from the Rocky Mountains. They got copper and silver from around Lake Superior up here. They got mica and hematite from the Appalachian Mountains. They have marine shells and shark teeth from the Atlantic and the Gulf Coast. So everywhere you look, there's remarkable cases of people doing long distance trade in precious materials. Sometimes what you study is fortuitous because they're so characteristic that you can recognize them for what they are. Bar and broadwing stone pendants are very widely distributed throughout pre-Columbian America. Most of them come from the Tairona tribes in Colombia, There are jade ones from Costa Rica. There are other ones in Meso in South America, and there are shell ones. And these are stylized bats. And bats are undoubtedly mysterious creatures that were revered and feared in the ancient world. Some are outright dangerous, like vampire bats. Others are mysterious because they could fly, and they were mammals, they had fur. So when you had special animals like that, ancient peoples tried to replicate them in wearable materials. Now, you can't talk about trade without talking about shells. And two shells are terrifically important. Spineless, or the spiny oyster, and olivella. And what's interesting is that these two shells were used both in the Americas and in Europe. Earlier in Europe, about 8,000 years ago, but in the Americas, they were used in pre-Columbian times. And here is a spiny oyster, which probably many of you have seen at Tucson. This is olivella, and this is an edible shell. And what did the pre-Columbians do? They made true inlay or overlay with them, or they even made garments, like his vest, of plaques of spondylus with mother of pearl and other shells. As I said, 8,000 years ago in Europe, they used these shells. 5,000 years ago, they started using these in Valdivia culture in Ecuador. And here's a cover from National Geographic that one of my friends wrote about these royal tombs in Sipan, Peru. And if you look here, all these are made out of spondylus shells, thousands and thousands of beads, layers of them, or they were placed intact about the foot of the warrior king. And then other layers have many more spondylus artifacts. So spondylus is terrifically important in these cultures. And here they made these broad collars of thousands of shell beads. Elsewhere, here's a raw shell. Here's what they processed to make ornaments. In Peru, they would either use camelid fibers and plaques, or they would make these elaborate mosaics with spondylus disc beads, or they would use whole shells. So you could see that this shell was sacred to them and terrifically important. But what is interesting is that spondylus is a warm water shell. Most of Peru is too cold. The Peru current is very cold. Only in northern Peru was there spondylus. So what did the Peruvians do? They wanted it so badly, they would get into balsa rafts, go thousands of kilometers up to West Mexico and trade for this shell, which then came back to them. But in the process, they introduced metalworking, other techniques, and textiles to Mexico. So here's a remarkable case of long distance trade using nothing but sailing balsa rafts. And one of the things that the luxury elites demanded were overlaid inlay using spondylus and other shells. As you can see here, spondylus is inlaid, here's inlaid, here they've carved it, and This is either lapis or the Chilean equivalent. And in the Southwest, the bird forms were made on spineless shells with turquoise and a red sandstone. These were all terrifically important things for the very elite. And how did the Southwest learn this technique of overlay? It's probably from Casas Grandes in Chihuahua, which was an outpost from Mesoamerica. Here you have a Mesoamerican overlay pendant, and here's one from the prehistoric Southwest. And there's a lot of similarities. So I realized you saw the use of turquoise. Well, in prehistoric times, turquoise mines were quite prevalent in the Southwest and a bit of Mexico. And much of the demand was from Mesoamerica. So they traded turquoise southwards for other treasure goods. Here's an ancient turquoise mine. And how did they mine it? Well, they would take a stone hammer, make a maul out of it to use to whack against the wall. They would build a fire. When they heated up the matrix, they would splash water on it, crack it, and take it out. And Chilean prehistoric copper miners also worked. So it was a terrifically hard thing. Those of you that are gemologists know how difficult it is to extract turquoise. This map shows you the turquoise trade between the Southwest and Mesoamerica through various time periods. And this is another way of expressing it, how the trade waxed and waned. Although now there's some belief that the Southwest did not trade so much, that Mesoamerica also had turquoise sites, but that has not really been proven yet. No mines have been found. Well, throughout the Southwest, many things were considered valuable and traded. Ceramic vessels, macaw and feathers, greenstone ornaments, fabrics, obsidian, salt, money, and just to show you, here is the Southwest. All these orange indicates shell. And you can see that the trade routes were tremendously numerous, and shells were traded all the way into the plains. And back came things like buffalo hides. So turquoise shell, macaw feathers, copper bells, buffalo hides, all precious trade objects in the prehistoric Southwest. If we zoom in just to look at, say, Arizona, you can see ceramics being traded, turquoise, salt, macaw, shells from the Gulf, and also shells, abalone shells from the Pacific Ocean. So the trade was extensive. Now, argillite, which you saw here, this red sandstone, just like pipestone in the Midwest, like Minnesota, is a very valuable material found around Prescott. Here are various jewelry items. Here's how they worked it so that they got these tiny flakes. And here it shows you the amount of trade the Hohokam engaged in. And almost all these overlays has a central spot of red. And many of these represent stylized frogs. And there's actually a species of toad frog in the Southwest that has a red spot. So that may be what they're simulating. And here's a jeweler's cache of argillite, turquoise, fossils that have worked. Some are finished, some are half worked. So just to wind up, I come from a very strange background. I was an ethologist, or someone that studied comparative animal behavior. I actually studied endangered pupfish of the deserts, which are rapidly going extinct. The last paper I wrote in 2013, the fish died before my paper was published, despite a worldwide effort to bring a male from Germany and mate with a female from Mexico. We weren't able to make it, and the species went extinct. So it has been said I was an experimental gerontologist. I studied how to extend lifespan by things like restricting calories or changing the temperature for cold-blooded animals. Then when I left to found the Bead Journal, I had to essentially train myself to be a photographer, also to write in a way unlike the way scientists write. You can't write about jewelry if you don't know how it's made. So I trained myself to become a jeweler. I've always been a fairly good artist. Here's some of the jewelry that I make. I use alternative materials like polyester or heat bent black bamboo. And since I worked in college as a model maker, I essentially continued that throughout life. And I have a new book coming out in England about building miniature ships of World War II. So that tells you what my 4 or 5 decades of work has been. And those of you that are ornament subscribers might recognize some of these covers. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Yeah, Robert, there's a few questions that I could read you from the chat.
Sure.
Okay, so Celeste wanted to know, how do people who study the techniques of bead making know the techniques used to make these beads?
It used to be, you looked at a lot of beads. You have to have a fundamental knowledge of how things are made. It helps to be able to know how glass is made, how fans is made, how stone is worked, and how metal is worked. And then, you do a lot of study. You ask a lot of people questions. But now, we have many more sophisticated tools, but I don't have them. I'm an eyeball scientist. I don't have real tools other than by binocular scope. So it's very much you're essentially a scientific sleuth. The way that people learned how stone bead was drilled was 2 dentists started getting interested. They would put dental impression cement into the perforations of beads and take them out and study them with electron microscopes. And from that, they deduced whether something was abrasive, something was a copper using grit. So everything you learn, you have to learn through observation. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not, sometimes you make a right guess. But everyone that I think writes knowledgeably is someone that knows a lot about how things are made, what they're composed of. You need to know whether they're soft or not. Lots of times I have to tell people real from fake. have to train them how to use their teeth to tell if something's glass, shell, plastic. So, you know, you use everything you got up here and in your hands, and you do a lot of reading.
So Mel wanted me to ask you what faience was made from again?
It's a mix of iron, quartz, various minerals like latron, oxides like copper or iron or cobalt. These or manganese, these all give you different colors. Iron will give you greens and blues. Copper will give you blue. Cobalt gives you that beautiful cobalt color. And manganese will give you black.
What holds it together?
It glazes. It's a very
Okay.
thick glaze.
It's fused together then.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
usually just fused on the outside. But in glassy faience, which is fired very long, the whole thing essentially turns to glass. So as you can see from that chart, all the silicas are very related to each other. And how they end up depends on the ingredients, how long you fire them. So, you know, I liken the scientist to being in the priesthood. Even if you leave the flock or you're defrocked, you never change, because a scientist always looks at things in a skeptical way, and you see, we have to probe and find out what's going on. And sometimes we strike it right, sometimes we don't. But what you need to do is have an inquiring mind and not believe the first thing, the second, and the third thing you're told. Because there's a lot of bullshit out there. And lots of people get fooled by paying thousands of dollars for fakes. If they only knew a little bit about material scientists, they'd be protected. And I'm sure in gemology, lots of people get taken also by things that are irradiated or heated and, you know, enhanced.
What Richard wanted me to ask you about the bead production in Venice on the island of Murano.
Well, there have been several recent books on that. I've written about that. There are essentially two types of beads: seed beads and lampwork beads. I'm not sure what he means, but what made them rich was probably seed beads, because seed beads are made by drawing a gather of glass with a hole that's formed by a breath of air. You heat this, then you pull it, sometimes many, many meters, and you chop it up into tiny cylinders. Then you heat these to round them up, and they become seed beads. And this is what was traded all over the world. If you look at Native American beadwork, you look at, say, Siberians, everybody used seed beads, and it made Venice a terrifically rich place. Then they also made lampwork beads, but that was a different type of trade, and that was traded a lot later and to places like Africa. But both types went all over the world. I don't know if that answers your question. And the reason why Murano was a bead making center is because you need furnaces to work glass. And in the age when most buildings were wood, glass workers burned down too many towns. So they put them on an island and therefore restrict how far the fires would spread. But it was a close secret. You could be killed if you revealed how glass was made, because there's so many recipes for glass. You need to know how much to put in of this oxide, how much you put in of that glass to make this type of glass. And these are tightly kept secrets, and most glass workers in this tight societies where you learn by being an apprentice.
I worked over there for a year.
Ah.
Yeah, and with probably one of the most famous glass masters that was alive at the time. His name was Pino Signoretto,
Oh yes, oh yes.
and he provided me a cane that was pulled to look like a rooster. And he told me that all the glass masters there wore these roosters on their lapel to designate that they were a master of glass. But he said that the one that he gave us was from like the 1800s.
From
He said-
China, probably.
And he said that it was very old and that there was something that weren't around anymore. But he was telling me that they kind of dominated the bead trade for hundreds of years. But I've never
Mhm.
really seen any books on this side of the trade. I do have a necklace that my wife got that's made of ruby seeds.
Uh-huh.
It was rosary, and but you don't really see the antique beads there anymore. But I know that it was a major center.
Well, that rooster is the symbol of the city of Antiquity. And you see very elaborate roosters everywhere. But that is a Murini or mosaic technique. And the Venetians were ones that practiced it after the Roman Egyptians stopped it. So it's a very rare technique that's done only in a few societies in the world. And you are lucky to be working with him, because he is quite a glass master. But for all of you have looked and know what chevron beads are, right? Star beads. They were terrifically valuable in the trade, especially in places like the Southwest. So that was one of the products of Venice. And we've written about them and how they're made, and I've watched them being made. So there are a number of books recently that are pretty good. Venice.
I don't seem to have any more questions. Anybody?
I hope I didn't throw too much at you too fast, but it's a subject that I think is really fascinating, because I think many of these traders had to go long distances. They didn't know the culture or the language of the people that they're trading with. And how do you make sure that some trade is equitable and you don't wind up fighting and killing them? No one has really explained how that is done, but it's probably like barter. If you've ever bartered with someone, I used to take my Mexican limes to a farmer's market and trade for exotic fruit. And I guess it's like, okay, I give you 3 of mine because they're small. You give me 1 big fruit. And, both people are happy. So, I would love to know, but we'll never know really how people trade it, especially when they took such risks, traveled such distances, and then, got there. What prevented them from being killed for their goods? Maybe the closest thing is how the fur traders traded with Native Americans. They bring in beads and trinkets, and the Native Americans giving them valuable beaver pelts. It's something that, we may never know how long distance trade, medium, or down the line trade work. But it is one of the most important phenomena in this world.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful talk. We're so glad that we had you. It's been an amazing evening.
Well, thank you all for putting up with this long tirade. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your expertise.
Bye.
Wonderful man.
Thank,
Very interesting. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Good luck on your
Bye-bye.
I would love to go
Thank
on that
you.
hunt, but I don't think I could stand the trek.
Yeah. We'll share our treasures when we come back.
Okay. Bye. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Elaine.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Couldn't let me go.
Bye, Marjorie.
I
Bye.
want to thank. I wanted to thank our current speaker. Thank you, everybody, for joining our current program. We really enjoyed the information that we received relating to our collecting specimens, how they all started, where they came from. It was a very informative program, and we really want to thank Patrick. Thank you very much for this very important program. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Welcome.
thank you.
I'm Robert. Patrick's my son, but he does all the work, so his name is on everything.
His name is on the screen there for your
Yeah.
Zoom meeting here.
Patrick is Robert's son.
What? Yeah, he's been an editor with us, and since he was in high school, and now that Carolyn passed, there's only the two of us on the staff of Ornament now, and he is really the backbone.
That's so awesome.
Well then, Robert,
Thanks for a great talk and great lesson.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. I really enjoyed your company. I hope someday people can meet face to face again.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Amen.
Yeah.
We look forward to it.
well then,
Yes.
Robert, thank you very much for a very special program, and we hope to see you again.
Okay, and what is that big pile of pyrite doing there?
What's
Someone-
behind you, Ellen?
What?
What's behind you?
Oh, that's just some blue glass.
Okay.
I didn't even know y'all could see me.
Oh,
Yep, we can see. It looks like a big giant rock behind you.
yeah, it looks like pyrite.
I used to have a big lapis lazuli piece that I got from Quartzsite,
Oh.
kind of a pyramid, but I have to move everything because now the kitties, if it's not really
Mhm.
solid, and they can swoosh everything off of a shelf very easily. So
Very
my rock
easily.
collection is sort of clumped up in places.
Hey, just for you guys, if you didn't see, I posted on the chat, on the 24th through the 28th of March, a friend of mine is doing a trunk show at the Bead station down on Forbes Road in Laguna Niguel. And he's got some of the most beautiful rough and cab turquoise and variscite stones that I've ever seen. And
Ooh.
he'll be selling them there. So if you guys are interested, check it out and pass the word around.
And in the chat, I put the information about the field trip this weekend. So go up to the top of the chat list and you'll see that information about how to get in touch with the searchers group.
Thanks, Ellen.
When you
Sure.
put it up,
Well, don't close the meeting yet so we can read it.
Oh, yeah, leave it open one more
Marjorie,
minutes. Thank you.
when you
Yes.
put up the YouTube, could you let me know so I can let people know?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your help.
Thank you.
This was my first Zoom lecture, and I hope it was okay.
Awesome.
Wonderful. So good.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Hey, I see you, Ruth.
I see Kitty Mama.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's so nice to see some new faces too. We hope to see y'all in real life sometime soon.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.
Good
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 night.
night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
And
Bye.
we want to welcome everybody to our club. And we now have our 59th year behind us. Thank you all. Okay,
In front of us.
or it could be in front of us. Yeah. Okay. Everybody, live long and prosper, okay?
Good
I
night.
hope so. Bye.
Night.
Everybody.
Marjorie,
Yes.
can you log me out? I don't know what I did that I can't access my exit. I have said leave, but I'm still here.
Liz.
Get off the computer. You're